The gunshot outside the dusty windows of the cattleman's saloon made McKenzie freeze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild Mustang. She hadn't expected her journey west to turn so perilous so quickly. But here she was in Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory, 1878, clutching her carpet bag and surrounded by men whose eyes lingered too long on her travel-worn dress. "Well, ain't you a pretty little thing?" drawled a burly man with tobacco-stained teeth. "What brings a fine lady like yourself to our establishment?" Violet took a step back, feeling the press of bodies closing in. 5 men, all with varying degrees of menace in their expressions, had formed a loose circle around her. The bartender merely wiped a glass, his disinterested gaze suggesting she'd receive no help from that quarter. "I'm just passing through," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Looking for a place to stay the night before continuing on to— You can stay with me, darlin'," another man interrupted, his breath heavy with whiskey. "Got a real comfortable bed that's mighty lonely." The others chuckled, and Violet felt her stomach twist with fear. She'd heard stories about lone women in frontier towns, but desperation had driven her west after her father's death left her penniless in Boston. The teaching position in Sacramento promised a new beginning if she could get there alive. The saloon doors swung open with a bang, and a tall figure silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun stepped inside. His spurs jingled softly as he moved into the room, and Violet caught her breath at the sight of him. Broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face partially obscured by several days' growth of beard, he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger. His eyes, piercing blue beneath the brim of his dusty hat, took in the scene in an instant. Without hesitation, he strode forward, one hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. "Back away," he commanded, his voice deep and steady. "She's my wife." A stunned silence fell over the saloon. Violet opened her mouth to protest this falsehood, then closed it again. Whatever game this stranger was playing, it seemed her safest option at the moment. The circle of men shifted uneasily, looking between Violet and the newcomer with suspicion. "Your wife," challenged the burliest of the group. "Funny, ain't never seen her before." "And we know everyone in Cottonwood Springs." The stranger's mouth curved into a dangerous smile. "Just got married back east, came out to meet me. Ain't that right, darlin'?" Violet managed a nod, hoping her face didn't betray her confusion. "Yes, husband." The cowboy moved to her side with easy grace, sliding an arm around her waist in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Name's Griffin Blackwood," he announced to the room, "and I don't take kindly to men circling my wife like vultures. Griffin." The name suited him, Violet thought, still trembling slightly at his touch. "Might have mentioned you had a wife coming, Blackwood," the bartender called out, finally showing interest in the proceedings. "Wanted it to be a surprise," Griffin replied smoothly. "Now, if you gentlemen will excuse us, I'd like to take my bride home." He guided Violet toward the door, his arm still firm around her waist. She could feel the tension in his body, coiled and ready should any of the men decide to challenge his claim. Once outside in the harsh sunlight, Violet pulled away. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Blackwood, but I am not your wife." Griffin's eyes crinkled at the corners. "No, madam, you certainly are not, but you looked like you needed rescuing, and that seemed the quickest way to do it." "I appreciate your intervention," she said stiffly. "I'm Violet McKenzie, traveling to Sacramento for a teaching position." He tipped his hat. "Pleasure, Miss McKenzie. Now, where were you planning to stay tonight? Cottonwood Springs isn't the safest place for a lady traveling alone." Violet hesitated. "I was hoping to find respectable lodgings, but I'm unfamiliar with the town." "There's a boarding house run by Mrs. Holloway about 3 streets over. Decent place, fair prices." He paused, studying her face. "I'd be happy to escort you there." Something in his expression, genuine concern without expectation, made Violet relax slightly. "That would be most kind, Mr. Blackwood." As they walked through the dusty streets, Violet kept stealing glances at her unlikely savior. His clothing marked him as a working cowboy, well-worn boots, simple cotton shirt beneath a leather vest, and a gun belt that looked like an extension of his body rather than an accessory. Yet there was something in his manner that suggested education and breeding at odds with his rough appearance. "How did you come to be in Cottonwood Springs?" she asked, curiosity getting the better of her. Griffin adjusted his hat against the glaring sun. "I've got a small spread about 10 miles outside town. Nothing fancy, but it's mine, or will be once I finish paying the bank." He glanced down at her. "What brings a Boston lady all the way to Arizona territory?" Violet blinked in surprise. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" A smile tugged at his mouth. "Your accent, plus those shoes weren't made for western dust." She looked down at her once fine boots, now coated with the reddish dirt of the territory. "My father passed away 6 months ago. He left considerable debts, and I found myself without home or prospects. This teaching position was the only suitable opportunity I could find." Griffin nodded, understanding in his eyes. The West is full of people starting over. No shame in that. They arrived at a neat 2-story clapboard house with a small sign reading Holloway Boarding House hanging by the door. A gray-haired woman with a kind face answered Griffin's knock. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Miss McKenzie. She's in need of lodging for the night, possibly longer depending on the stagecoach schedule." The older woman smiled warmly. "Of course, dear, I have a lovely room at the back of the house, quiet and with a nice view of my garden." Griffin tipped his hat to both women. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Holloway's capable hands, Miss McKenzie. If you need anything, I'll be at the general store for another hour or so." As he turned to leave, Violet called after him, "Mr. Blackwood." When he looked back, she continued, "Thank you again." "Your kindness won't be forgotten." Something flickered in his blue eyes, something that made Violet's heart beat a little faster. "My pleasure, Miss McKenzie. Welcome to the West, Mrs. Holloway showed Violet to a small but immaculate room furnished with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. "Supper's at 6 sharp," she explained. "In the meantime, there's fresh water for washing up." Left alone, Violet sank onto the bed, the events of the day washing over her. The journey had already been more perilous than she'd anticipated, and she'd barely begun. Yet something about the cowboy's confident manner and the warmth in his eyes when he smiled lingered in her thoughts. Griffin Blackwood had been her guardian angel today. But tomorrow, she would continue her journey west, leaving Cottonwood Springs and him behind. Morning came with the news that the next stagecoach wouldn't depart for 3 days due to reports of Apache activity along the route. Violet sat at Mrs. Holloway's breakfast table, dismay evident on her face. 3 days. But I must reach Sacramento by the 15th or they'll give the position to someone else. Mrs. Holloway patted her hand sympathetically. "There's nothing to be done about it, dear. Safety first. Besides, the delay will give you a chance to rest. You look exhausted from your travels." Violet couldn't deny the truth of this. The journey from Boston had been grueling, long days on trains and stagecoaches, uncomfortable nights in unfamiliar beds. Perhaps a short respite would do her good. After breakfast, she decided to explore the small town, needing to stretch her legs after so many days of confinement. Cottonwood Springs proved to be a typical frontier settlement, a main street lined with basic businesses, a few side streets of homes, and the ever-present dust coating everything. She noted the location of the general store, remembering Griffin's mention of it the previous day. Almost as if her thoughts had conjured him, she spotted the tall cowboy emerging from the store, arms laden with supplies. He caught sight of her at the same moment, and his face broke into a smile that transformed his rugged features. "Miss McKenzie, settling in at Mrs. Holloway's, I hope?" "Yes, quite comfortably, thank you, though I've just learned the stagecoach won't depart for 3 more days." Griffin shifted his packages. "That's the frontier for you. Everything happens on its own schedule." He hesitated, then added, "Since you're stranded here, would you allow me to show you around? There's not much to see in town, but the countryside has its charms." Violet hesitated. Propriety dictated she decline such an invitation from a man she barely knew. Yet something about Griffin Blackwood inspired trust, and the prospect of being confined to the boarding house for 3 days was unappealing. "That's very kind, Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps a brief tour. I'd be honored. I need to take these supplies back to my ranch, but I could return this afternoon with a wagon if that suits you," she nodded, surprising herself with her eagerness. "I'll be ready." True to his word, Griffin appeared at the boarding house shortly after noon, driving a well-kept wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His shirt was clean, his hair neatly combed beneath his hat, and his face freshly shaven, revealing a strong jaw and the hint of a dimple in his right cheek. Mrs. Holloway, watching from the doorway as Griffin helped Violet into the wagon, gave a knowing smile. "Be back before dark, you two. The desert gets mighty cold once the sun sets." Griffin guided the wagon out of town, taking a well-traveled road that wound through scrubby hills dotted with cacti and mesquite. To Violet's eastern eyes, the landscape seemed harsh and alien, yet there was an undeniable beauty in its stark simplicity and the remarkable clarity of the air. "It's so vast," she murmured, taking in the panoramic view as they climbed a gentle rise. "In Boston, buildings block the horizon. Here you can see forever." Griffin nodded. "That's what drew me to this country. The space, the freedom, room to breathe and be your own man." "How long have you lived here?" Violet asked, genuinely curious about this enigmatic cowboy. "5 years. Came west after the war with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back." He glanced at her, something guarded in his expression. "Fought for the Union, saw things no man should see. Afterward, I couldn't settle back into city life." Violet studied his profile, understanding dawning. "You were looking for peace." "Something like that." He pulled the wagon to a stop beneath the spreading branches of a cottonwood tree near a small, clear stream. "This is one of my favorite spots. Thought we might rest the horses and have a bite to eat." He spread a blanket in the dappled shade and produced a simple picnic: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a jar of cool water. As they ate, Griffin pointed out features of the landscape, naming plants and animals unfamiliar to Violet. His knowledge impressed her, as did his evident love for this wild country. "You're very different from the cowboys I encountered in the saloon," she observed. Griffin chuckled. "Those weren't cowboys, Miss McKenzie, just drifters and troublemakers. Real cowboys are too busy working to spend afternoons drinking and harassing ladies." "And you're a real cowboy?" she asked, a teasing note in her voice. His blue eyes met hers. "I try to be. Honest work, fair dealings. The code out here is simple: your word is your bond, and you treat others with respect. A noble philosophy." Violet found herself increasingly drawn to this man whose rough exterior concealed such thoughtfulness. They spent the afternoon exploring the area around the stream, with Griffin sharing stories of frontier life and Violet describing her experiences teaching in Boston. The conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by laughter and moments of shared appreciation for the wild beauty surrounding them. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the landscape, Griffin reluctantly suggested they head back to town. The return journey seemed much shorter to Violet, wrapped in the comfortable warmth of their conversation. At the boarding house gate, Griffin helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. They lingered for a moment, closer than propriety strictly allowed, before Violet stepped back. "Thank you for today, Mr. Blackwood. I've seen the West through new eyes." "Griffin," he said softly. "Out here formality seems out of place," she smiled. "Griffin then, and I'm Violet." "Violet," he repeated, as if savoring the name. "Would you allow me to call on you tomorrow? There's a spot up in the hills where the wildflowers bloom after rain. We had a shower last week and they should be at their peak." "I would like that very much," she replied, surprised by how much she meant it. The next 2 days passed in a blur of discovery and growing connection. Griffin showed Violet natural wonders. She could never have imagined a hidden canyon where ancient peoples had carved symbols into the red rock, a hilltop carpeted with delicate desert blooms, a pool of crystal water where tiny fish darted like living jewels. With each excursion, the bond between them strengthened, built on shared laughter, meaningful conversations, and an undeniable attraction neither could deny. On the evening before the stagecoach was scheduled to depart, Griffin invited Violet to dinner at the town's small restaurant. She spent extra time on her appearance, arranging her hair in soft waves and wearing her best traveling dress, a deep blue that matched Griffin's eyes. When he arrived to escort her, his appreciative gaze made her cheeks warm. "You look beautiful, Violet." The restaurant was simple but clean, with white cloths on the tables and a vase of desert flowers at each setting. They ordered the special beef stew with fresh biscuits and talked of everything and nothing, both aware of the impending separation but neither wanting to acknowledge it. Finally, as they lingered over coffee, Griffin reached across the table to take her hand. "I know you've got your heart set on that teaching position in Sacramento, and I wouldn't dream of asking you to give up your plans. But I want you to know these past days have meant more to me than I can say." Violet's throat tightened with emotion. "They've meant a great deal to me as well. I'm not a wealthy man and my ranch is modest, but it's growing. I've got plans, Violet, good plans." His fingers tightened around hers. "Would you consider writing to me? Getting to know each other through letters while you try your hand at teaching in Sacramento." Hope bloomed in Violet's chest. "I would like that very much." Griffin's smile transformed his face. "And perhaps, when you've had time to settle and decide if the West is truly for you, you might consider visiting Cottonwood Springs again." "I think that could be arranged," she replied, returning his smile. They walked back to the boarding house slowly, hands occasionally brushing, each touch sending warmth through Violet's body. At the gate, Griffin turned to face her, his expression serious. "Violet, I know we've only known each other for a few days, but I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life. I'm not asking for promises, just a chance." She looked up at him, this man who had rescued her and then revealed himself to be so much more than a gallant cowboy. "Griffin, I came west seeking a new beginning. I never expected to find someone like you." He lowered his head slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished. Instead, Violet rose on her tiptoes, meeting his lips with her own. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, Griffin rested his forehead against hers. "I'll be at the stagecoach tomorrow to see you off," he whispered, "and I'll be counting the days until I hear from you." Violet slept little that night, her mind filled with conflicting emotions. The teaching position represented security and independence, values she had always prized. Yet Griffin offered something she hadn't known. She was seeking connection, understanding, and the promise of a life built together in this wild, beautiful land. Morning came too quickly. Griffin appeared at the boarding house to carry her trunk to the stagecoach, his face composed but his eyes revealing the depth of his feelings. They walked to the stage station in companionable silence, both aware that words were inadequate for the moment. The coach was already waiting, other passengers boarding as the driver secured luggage on top. Violet felt a sudden panic at the thought of leaving, of possibly never seeing Griffin again despite their intentions to correspond. "Griffin, she began, then stopped, uncertain what she wanted to say. He took her hands in his. "I know, it's fast and it's crazy, but sometimes life surprises you." He reached into his pocket and pressed something into her palm. "A token to remember me by." Violet opened her hand to find a small silver brooch in the shape of a cottonwood leaf. "It's beautiful. It was my mother's, one of the few things I have left of her." Griffin's voice was husky with emotion. "I want you to have it no matter what you decide. Last call for the Sacramento stage." The driver shouted. Violet looked at the waiting coach, then back at Griffin. In his face, she saw everything she had come west to find: opportunity, challenge, the chance for a life lived authentically. "I can't go," she whispered, the realization washing over her with absolute clarity. Griffin's eyes widened. "What? I can't go," she repeated, stronger now. "The teaching position was a means to an end: security, independence, but I realize now there are schools everywhere, including here." She took a deep breath. "If I'm truly seeking a new beginning, why not make it here with you?" Joy transformed Griffin's face. "Are you certain? I don't want you to have regrets." "The only regret I would have is leaving when my heart is telling me to stay." Violet stepped closer to him. "I don't know what the future holds, Griffin, but I want to discover it with you." He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that drew smiles from onlookers. "I promise you won't regret this, Violet. We'll build something wonderful together." "Miss, your trunk," called the stagecoach driver, clearly confused. Griffin laughed. "Leave it, sir. The lady's staying in Cottonwood Springs." As the stagecoach pulled away in a cloud of dust, Griffin turned to Violet with a smile that promised adventure, challenge, and abiding love. "Welcome home, Violet McKenzie." "Home," she repeated, the word filled with new meaning as she looked up at the man who had claimed her heart in the most unexpected way. "I like the sound of that." The first months of Violet's new life in Cottonwood Springs passed in a whirlwind of activity. Within weeks of her decision to stay, she approached the town council about establishing a proper school. The current arrangement, children gathering irregularly in the back room of the church with whoever was available to teach them, was woefully inadequate. "These children deserve better," she argued passionately at the town meeting. "They need consistent education to prepare them for the future. This territory will soon be a state, and its citizens must be ready to participate fully in democracy." Her eloquence, combined with her Eastern education, convinced the council to convert an abandoned storehouse into a schoolroom and hire her as the town's first official teacher. The salary was modest, but it gave Violet the independence she valued while allowing her to put down roots in the community. Griffin supported her endeavors wholeheartedly, often riding into town after a long day on his ranch to help with repairs to the schoolhouse or to construct simple desks and benches. The townspeople, initially wary of the Eastern schoolmarm, gradually warmed to Violet as they witnessed her dedication to their children and her growing adaptation to Western ways. Their courtship proceeded with a proper balance of propriety and passion. Griffin called on Violet regularly at the boarding house, taking her for rides in his wagon, escorting her to church socials, and occasionally stealing kisses in the shadows of cottonwood trees. Mrs. Holloway observed their blossoming romance with approval, though she maintained strict rules about gentlemen callers. "Just because we're in the frontier doesn't mean we abandon civilized behavior," she would say with a pointed look at Griffin when his visits extended past her preferred hours. As autumn approached, transforming the landscape with subtle shifts of color and light, Griffin invited Violet to visit his ranch on a Sunday afternoon. Mrs. Holloway agreed to chaperone, her curiosity about the Cowboy's homestead overcoming her concern for strict propriety. The Blackwood Ranch lay in a protected valley 10 miles from town, nestled against rolling hills that provided shelter from the harshest winds. A modest cabin stood near a clear running creek, surrounded by corrals, a barn, and various outbuildings. Beyond stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed contentedly. "It's not much to look at yet," Griffin said apologetically as he helped the ladies down from the wagon, "but I've got plans." He showed them around with evident pride: the barn he had built with his own hands, the spring-fed well that provided sweet water year-round, the orchard of young fruit trees that would one day produce apples, pears, and peaches. Throughout the tour, Violet noted the solid construction, the thoughtful planning, and the myriad small touches that revealed Griffin's commitment to building something lasting. While Mrs. Holloway rested on the porch with a glass of cool cider, Griffin led Violet to a small rise behind the cabin. From this vantage point, they could see the entire valley spread before them, golden in the afternoon light. "I bought this land because of this view," Griffin said quietly. "First time I stood here, I could see what it could become, not just a ranch but a home." Violet's heart quickened at the tenderness in his voice. "It's beautiful, Griffin." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Violet, I know we've only known each other a few months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "I love you. Will you marry me and build this dream with me?" Tears blurred Violet's vision as joy welled up inside her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Griffin, I will marry you." He stood and pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise of their future together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Griffin reached into his pocket and produced a simple gold band with a small pearl set in the center. "It was my grandmother's," he explained, sliding it onto her finger. "I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." They returned to the cabin hand in hand to share their news with Mrs. Holloway, who beamed with satisfaction. "I knew it from the first moment I saw you together," she declared. "Some things are simply meant to be." News of their engagement spread quickly through Cottonwood Springs. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many townspeople expressing delight that their new teacher had decided to make a permanent home among them. Even the men from the saloon, whom Violet now recognized as relatively harmless despite their rough manners, tipped their hats respectfully when they encountered her on the street. "Never thought old Blackwood would settle down," one remarked loudly enough for her to hear. "You must be something special, madam." The wedding was set for late October, when the worst heat of summer had passed, but before winter's chill descended on the territory. The entire town turned out for the celebration, held in the newly completed church with garlands of autumn leaves and late-blooming wildflowers decorating the simple pews. Violet wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Holloway had helped her sew, with the silver cottonwood leaf brooch pinned at her throat. Griffin, almost unrecognizable in a new black suit, waited for her at the altar with such love in his eyes that Violet nearly forgot to breathe as she walked toward him on the arm of Mr. Thompson, the town's mayor, who had offered to give her away. The ceremony was brief but deeply moving. When Griffin recited his vows in a voice that carried to every corner of the church, promising to love, honor, and protect Violet all the days of his life, there wasn't a dry eye in the congregation. As they exchanged rings, Griffin's a simple gold band to match Violet's, the pastor pronounced them husband and wife with evident satisfaction. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Blackwood," he announced. Griffin gathered Violet gently in his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart soar. The church erupted in cheers and applause as they turned to face their new community as a married couple. The celebration that followed at the town hall lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire county. Griffin and Violet moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes with genuine gratitude. As the evening wore on, Griffin whispered in Violet's ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Blackwood." The ride to the ranch in the moonlight, seated close together in Griffin's wagon, was a memory Violet knew she would cherish forever. Stars blazed overhead in the clear desert sky, and the air carried the scent of sage and juniper. Griffin's arm around her shoulders kept her warm against the night chill, his solid presence a promise of the life they would build together. At the cabin, Griffin lifted Violet into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "Welcome home, my love," he murmured, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. Violet looked around with new eyes. During the weeks of their engagement, Griffin had worked tirelessly to prepare the cabin for his bride. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt adorned the bed, and a small bookshelf held the few volumes they owned between them, the beginning of what Griffin promised would someday be an impressive library. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to face her husband. Griffin's eyes darkened with desire as he drew her into his arms. "You're perfect," he corrected, lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that began tenderly but quickly ignited into something more urgent. Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation for Violet. Griffin's patience and tenderness, as he introduced her to the intimate aspects of marriage, transformed initial nervousness into pleasure beyond anything she could have imagined. In his arms, she discovered new dimensions of herself and of their love, forging a bond that transcended the physical to touch something profound and eternal. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Violet felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it, love?" Griffin asked, concerned, as he brushed a tear from her cheek. "I'm just so happy," she explained. 6 months ago I was alone and afraid, heading west with nothing but uncertainty ahead. Now I have you, this home, this life we're building. It feels like a miracle." He kissed her forehead gently. "The miracle is that you stayed. That you saw something worth loving in a rough cowboy with dirt under his fingernails and too many dreams." "Those dreams are what I fell in love with," Violet told him. "That and your heart, Griffin Blackwood, the kindest, bravest heart I've ever known." Life as a rancher's wife brought challenges Violet had never anticipated, but she approached them with the same determination that had carried her across the continent. She learned to cook on a temperamental wood stove, to preserve fruits and vegetables for winter, to tend chickens and milk the cow Griffin brought home as a surprise 1 month after their wedding. "Her name's Buttercup," he announced proudly, leading the gentle Jersey to the small barn he had built adjacent to the cabin. "Thought you might like fresh milk and cream." Violet, who had never been closer to a cow than passing dairy wagons on Boston streets, approached the animal with trepidation. But under Griffin's patient instruction, she soon mastered the art of milking and came to enjoy the quiet moments with Buttercup at dawn and dusk. Winter brought new trials as storms swept down from the mountains, sometimes confining them to the cabin for days at a time. Yet these periods of isolation became precious to Violet, offering uninterrupted time with Griffin by the fire, reading aloud from their growing collection of books, playing chess on the set he carved during the long evenings, and sharing the intimacy that deepened with each passing day. Spring arrived with explosive beauty, the desert blooming in a riot of colors that took Violet's breath away. As the land renewed itself, she realized with a mixture of fear and joy that she too was experiencing renewal. One evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky with impossible hues of gold and crimson, Violet took Griffin's hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "I think we're going to have a baby," she said softly. Griffin's face reflected disbelief, then wonder, then a joy so profound it transformed his features. "A baby, you're sure?" Violet nodded. "Mrs. Thompson confirmed it yesterday when I went to town. She says around October, near our anniversary." Griffin gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most delicate porcelain. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child, Violet, a new life we've created together." The months of pregnancy brought changes to their routine. Griffin insisted on hiring a local boy to help with the heavier ranch work, freeing him to take on more of the household duties as Violet's condition advanced. He built a cradle from cottonwood, carving intricate patterns of leaves and stars into the headboard, and started construction on an addition to the cabin, a proper bedroom for themselves, and eventually a nursery for the baby. As summer blazed across the territory, Violet continued teaching, unwilling to abandon her students until absolutely necessary. The town council, initially skeptical about employing a married woman, had come to value her dedication so highly that they readily agreed to her proposal of training an assistant who could take over during her confinement and allow her to return part-time after the baby's arrival. "You've transformed that school," Griffin told her proudly as they lay in bed one night, his hand resting protectively on her growing belly. "Those children are learning things I never had the chance to study." "Every child deserves education," Violet replied, covering his hand with her own as the baby kicked vigorously. "Including this one, our son or daughter will have every advantage we can provide." Griffin's eyes softened. "Our child will have something far more valuable than book learning, though that's important too. They'll have your courage and determination, your kind heart and brilliant mind. And your strength and integrity," Violet added, "your vision and your steadfastness." They fell silent, contemplating the miracle growing between them, the physical manifestation of their love and hope for the future. October arrived with cooler temperatures, and the golden light that Violet had come to associate with her arrival in Cottonwood Springs a year earlier. As her time approached, Mrs. Thompson, the town's most experienced midwife, came to stay at the ranch, bringing her wealth of practical knowledge and reassuring presence. "First babies often take their time," she told Violet calmly when the initial pains began. "No need to worry, dear. Your body knows what to do." The labor was long and difficult, stretching through a day and night as Griffin paced anxiously outside the bedroom door, permitted entry only to bring fresh water and towels. When dawn broke on the second day, Violet's strength was flagging, her faith in her body's wisdom severely tested. "I can't do this," she gasped as another contraction tore through her. "It's too much." Mrs. Thompson wiped her brow with a cool cloth. "You can and you will, Violet Blackwood. You're one of the strongest women I've ever known. Your baby needs you to be strong for just a little longer." As if in response to these words, Violet felt a new determination rise within her. With the next contraction, she bore down with all her remaining strength, and suddenly the room filled with the indignant cry of a newborn. "A girl," Mrs. Thompson announced triumphantly. "A beautiful, healthy girl." When Griffin was finally allowed to enter, his face pale with worry and lack of sleep, Violet held out the tiny bundle wrapped in the special blanket she had knitted during the quiet evenings of her pregnancy. "Meet your daughter, Griffin." He took the baby with trembling hands, his expression transforming as he gazed down at the perfect face framed by wisps of dark hair. "She's miraculous," he whispered, "just like her mother." They named her Grace Eleanor Blackwood Grace for the blessing she represented in their lives, Eleanor for Violet's mother. From her first days, it was clear she possessed her father's steady temperament and her mother's bright curiosity, regarding the world with wide eyes that soon revealed themselves to be the same striking blue as Griffin's. Life adjusted to accommodate this new member of their family. Griffin completed the addition to the cabin, creating a cozy nursery adjacent to their bedroom. Violet divided her time between caring for Grace, maintaining their home, and returning to the schoolhouse 2 afternoons a week, often with the baby sleeping peacefully in a basket beside her desk while she taught. As Grace grew from newborn to infant to toddler, the Blackwood Ranch prospered along with her. Griffin's careful management and hard work expanded their herd and their holdings. By Grace's second birthday, they had added another bedroom to the growing cabin and hired a permanent ranch hand to help with the increasing workload. The evening of their third wedding anniversary, after Grace had been tucked into bed with her favorite stuffed rabbit, Griffin presented Violet with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "What's this?" she asked, smiling at his evident excitement. "Open it and see." Inside, Violet found a deed bearing both their names. "Griffin, what have you done?" "I bought the Henderson property that adjoins our land to the east," he explained. "It includes that stand of cottonwoods by the bigger creek and the meadow you love. I thought we might build a proper house there eventually. Something with a library for all your books and a big kitchen where you won't have to stoop under the rafters." Tears filled Violet's eyes. "It's wonderful, Griffin, but can we afford it?" he nodded, pulling her into his arms. "The ranch is doing well, better than I ever dreamed, and there's something else. He paused, his expression turning serious. "The territorial governor has appointed a new circuit judge for this district. He's offered me the position of sheriff for Cottonwood Springs and the surrounding county." Violet stared at him in surprise. "Sheriff? But the ranch—" "I'd still maintain the ranch with help," Griffin assured her. "But the territory's changing, Violet. Statehood is coming, and with it, the need for proper law and order, not just the rough justice of earlier days." He took her hands in his. "I believe I could make a difference, help shape what this place becomes, but I won't accept if you're against it." Violet considered his words carefully. The position would bring prestige but also danger. Yet it seemed a natural evolution of Griffin's character, his innate sense of justice, his desire to protect others, his vision for a civilized community rising from the frontier. "I think you would make an excellent sheriff," she said finally. "Fair and firm, respected by all. If this is what you want, you have my full support." Relief and gratitude flooded his face. "Thank you, I promise I'll be careful." "You'd better be," she replied, attempting sternness but unable to maintain it as he pulled her close. "Grace and I need you. And so does the baby who will arrive next spring." Griffin froze, his arms still around her. "What did you say?" Violet smiled up at him, enjoying his stunned expression. "I said Grace and I need you. And so does your second child, who should make an appearance around April or May, according to Mrs. Thompson." Joy exploded across Griffin's face. "Another baby? Oh, Violet!" He lifted her off her feet, spinning her in a circle before setting her gently down, suddenly concerned. "Should I be doing that in your condition?" she laughed, reveling in his happiness. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass, but perhaps save the more enthusiastic celebrations for later when we're alone." Later, as they lay entwined in their bed, Griffin's hand resting protectively over the slight swell of Violet's stomach, he whispered, "Do you ever think about that day in the saloon? How different everything might have been if I hadn't walked in at that moment?" Violet considered the question. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Perhaps not that day or in that way, but our paths were meant to cross, Griffin. Of that I'm certain." He kissed her softly. "I knew from the first moment I saw you surrounded by those men that you were special. Not just because you needed rescuing, though you handled yourself remarkably well, but because of the way you held yourself. Proud and determined, even in danger. And I knew you were different from any man I'd ever met," Violet replied. "Not because you pretended to be my husband to protect me, but because when you took me to Mrs. Holloway's, you asked for nothing in return. You were simply kind when kindness was what I needed most." Griffin gathered her closer. "I never imagined that day that I was meeting the woman who would become my wife, the mother of my children, the center of my world. Nor did I dream that a chance encounter in a frontier saloon would lead to such happiness," Violet murmured, nestling against his chest. "Yet here we are, building a life neither of us could have envisioned alone." "Here we are," Griffin agreed, his voice rich with contentment. "And here we'll stay, growing our family, our ranch, our community. Together." As Violet drifted towards sleep, safe in her husband's arms, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the frightened young woman alone in a hostile saloon to the confident wife, mother, and teacher she had become, every step had led her home to Griffin, to Grace, to the life they were creating in this wild, beautiful land. Their story had begun with a lie back away. "She's my wife," spoken by a stranger to protect her from danger. But that momentary falsehood had blossomed into the deepest truth of Violet's life. She was indeed Griffin Blackwood's wife, now and forever, bound to him by love that had only strengthened with each passing day and each challenge faced together. Outside their window, the stars wheeled across the desert sky, bearing silent witness to their love and to the future unfolding before them, a future bright with promise, rich with possibility, and anchored in the certainty that they had found in each other the greatest treasure the West could offer. A love as vast and enduring as the land itself.